All right, class, and welcome to this little introduction to creative writing or letting fiction defeat the facts. So, what we're going to talk about is the following: how to write fiction. And basically, we're going through the basics. And why we're doing this? Well, you might remember that we've been reading Sherlock, we're going to watch Sherlock, and then you're going to write yourselves. But to get you started, you need to know these following things. So, as you can see, we will be looking at the plot of the stories, the characters that you'll be making, conflicts and crises and themes, points of view, and a dramatic structure. A lot of this I know many of you might be familiar with, but this is how it's going to be. And just a quick reminder for you guys, you can always reuse this listening material that you have here. So if anything's uncertain, you pause, you rewind, and you listen again. That's how it is for you. So feel free to stop, take notes, use the material how you need to. It's here for you. All right. So let's get into it by looking at the plot. So basically, the plot is what happens in a story. It's not just like the small details of what happens in a story, but it's like the bigger picture. So not just the irregular actions. And to explain it, you can look at it like this from a study in Scarlet that we've been reading. Watson, when he was in India fighting, he got shot in the arm, but that doesn't make up the plot. The plot is not about Watson getting shot in the arm, but it's him meeting Sherlock. But him getting shot in the arm is part of that plot because it leads towards him meeting up with Sherlock. So that can be a part of the plot. That's how we can look at it. You can also look at it this way, that plot does not always have to come in a chronological order. So it's easier for you guys to start writing. If you're uncertain, then start like how, all right, my plot, I'm thinking of something, I know what to write about, I know what the story's going to be about. All right, then it's easier to write it in a chronological order. But you can add some really dramatic effects if you choose to give some backstory first, or maybe start at the ending and then tell the whole story. That's something you can do depending on how confident you feel in your writing and what you guys want to try out. It's up to you. But as an example, you can see that the Fellowship of the Ring, if you watch the movies or read the books, you can see that it starts with looking at how it was before. What happened in this land that we were, or that we're in. And then the story starts. But the beginning of the entire thing is not about the plot itself, because the plot, you would say, is about the Fellowship trying to destroy the ring. But the beginning of the story just shows that there's a lot of background here, and they want to give us that background before we jump into the plot. Things to think about. This will, of course, be followed by the dramatic structure that you might be familiar with. We're looking at it in some slides further down the road here, but just to know for you that this is coming, and that's something that will help you out a lot. And I also need you to remember to not forget to paint a picture of where you guys are in the story. How does it work? Where are we? You can't have a story without a location. Are we in Victorian London or 21st century Stockholm? Is it a fantasy world where you introduce elves and stuff like that? And a tip here, don't just write where we are. Try to build up the scene. If you look at Lord of the Rings, they don't say that we're in a fantasy world where there's elves and hobbits and orcs and stuff like that. they build that up and just integrate it into the entire narrative or the story, so the reader just gets immersed into this picture of, this is the world I'm currently in. That's where you guys want to go. So let's look at another really important aspect, and that would be characters. So for our characters, and here we see Watson and Holmes from the modern interpretation of Sherlock Holmes. Quickly, we have the protagonist, the hero, or the main character that we're looking at. And just here, that could be Sherlock. We call him our protagonist here. He's the one the story is about. Then we have the antagonist, the enemy of the hero. In the story of Sherlock Holmes, this would be Moriarty. That's his antagonist, the enemy. Then we have what we call foil characters that helps the reader understand the protagonist. Here it could be Watson, I would say. Some of you might argue that Watson could be the main character because he's the one speaking, he's the one giving us the story. But the story is about Sherlock. And Watson helps us understand who Sherlock is, alongside with a lot of other characters who's here as well. But just to make it clear for you, that's how it can work. And I want you guys to think like this. Try to create individuals and not just typical stereotypes. And that's hard. But because all characters fit into some kind of stereotype, Sherlock is you can judge him very easily. After what you guys have read and what you've seen, you can categorize him all you want. But try to add as much depth as you can. And that's a challenge. But I implore you to please try. At least see how much you can describe. And remember that characters drive the plot forward. It's their actions that reflect what the plot actually is. So if we look at, we go back to the Lord of the Rings example. It's what Frodo does, or Gandalf does, or the other characters from what they do in the setting, in the story, is what drives it forward. It drives us towards the plot. So their actions are really important. They're the ones driving the entire narrative. Without characters, you don't have a story. Something to think about, yeah? And this leads us to conflicts and crisis. And this is something for our characters. And why do we have this? Well, most readers will find conflicts interesting. Just a stale story without anything happening is not that fun. Not fun at all to listen to, or read, or view, in whichever medium you're taking in the story. And these conflicts can lead up to massive and interesting crises. But they can also help you build your characters. Just quick examples could be like a conflict could be, how does one character battle depression or a drug abuse? It's something that helps you give a picture of the character and what they're going to become in your story. And that's just internally in one character. Then we can look at it how it can be between characters as well, where we have how maybe two characters deal with conflicts between themselves. They get into a fight. We can see that in The Lord of the Rings as well. If we look at Frodo, he's battling like the desire to use the ring and just turn bad, if we simplify it. But at the same time, he has his relation to Sam, his friend, who's helping him with the goal that they're trying to achieve. And that conflict builds character and leads up to some kind of crisis. And that crisis could be a breaking point between characters. Characters can't always like each other. If you've seen the entire Lord of the Rings series or read all the books, then you know that Frodo sends Sam home. He tells him to leave. And that's a major crisis in the Return of the King, which it's called. That book or the film, which one you've read or viewed. And how does that turn out? Where do we go from there? We learn a lot about our characters. And this kind of stuff can push a story to a kind of climax. Like Sam's heroic return to save Frodo after he's been sent away and he's still coming back to help his friend. And all of this leads to a couple of terms here called denouement or the resolving of the crisis, which can lead to the conclusion where we show character growth. Right, so all of this can seem quite a bit tricky, but it's just food for thought and things to think about when you create your characters and what you have in your story. So, moving on, we're going to look at the theme. And what is that? Well, a theme would be, is there a meaning behind the story? Is there any moral here to us? This is not present in every kind of fiction that you read. It doesn't have to be. You can always interpret it and you can put it in there on purpose. Like a really good example, I would say, is if you look at Captain America, as you can see here on the picture. Because this character, well, he's a superhero battling the forces of evil and, yeah, very popular right now if you've looked at the entire Marvel franchise. But what is not depicted today in the films that you guys might have seen is that he was created during the Cold War era. That's when those comics started emerging. And he was there to like give the American people like a strong sense of like familiarity and, oh, we're fighting together for our land. This is Captain America. He represents us. So the moral behind him is some kind of like American values. What do we Americans stand for? And that's something to think about. Well, the Lord of the Rings, if we look at that, well, would that be about friendship? Perhaps. You could say that. But it doesn't have to be. And this is something that can add depth and force the reader to think. Do we need this? It can certainly make things a lot more interesting. And this all leads us in to the point of view. So basically, who is telling the story? And we have three versions here that you can use. Some more common, some more uncommon. So we have the first person view, and that's when you hear an active narrator. Maybe someone that says, I read about it. Or, I'm here to tell you about a man who grew up on the streets of London. It's I, you hear I'm talking, I'm giving you the narrative, I'm telling you the story. You can do it like that. But there's also the second person, which is quite uncommon in fiction and more common in poetry. Because characters are referred to as you. So when you read the story, it will always be a focus on you. Someone saying you. You who are the worst in the room. You grew up on the streets of London. It's like someone's telling a story about you, yourself. And that's quite interesting. It's hard to write like that, which is why it's kind of uncommon. But you could give it a try, and if you succeed, it could be a very poetic fictional novel that you guys are going to write, which is quite interesting. So, and the most common one, I would say, like, or at least according to me and the kind of fiction that I've been reading in my life, would be the third person. And that's when the author or the writer tells the story. And the example I have here is like Legolas jumped through the window, which is poorly spelled here. But remove that first H there and you'll be fine. So you're basically telling a story about the people who's in the story. And you're not an active part of it. And just for a question for you guys. In the first chapter of A Study in Scarlet that you've been reading, what form is it written in? Think about that. Who's telling the story? And who is it about? So, in short, first person is I, second person is you, and the third person, he, she, or it. Something to remember. And now to like summarize this, we're moving over into the dramatic structure. And what is this, you ask? Well, as you can see here, this is basically how the story progresses. And this is a bit of a very common kind of triangle that you see here. But it helps you understand. It's called the Freytag's Pyramid. And it symbolizes the theory of dramatic structure. And this is what it means. So first you have the exposition. That's the portion of the story that shows the background information, the kind of setting, events that happen before the main plot, characters' backstories, and so on. And then we have the rising action. In the rising action, you see a series of events that goes up to like a point of interest. And the story itself here is like building up towards some kind of climax, which would be the turning point, something that changes the protagonist's fate. So this could be something going badly, something going extremely well. This is all depending on how you guys decide to write your story. Is someone dying? Did you find like the scroll of truth or the sword of destiny? Whatever. It's about what you guys are writing. But here something good or something big, really effective happens. And then after this, it starts falling down a bit in the falling action. So here we go that the protagonist and the antagonist, their conflict kind of unravels. Someone's winning, someone's losing. And this might be like leading into the kind of final actions of the story, where we could have the denouement, which I might have pronounced wrong before for you guys. But this is like the end of the story. We're coming towards the conclusions, where the conflicts are resolved and your characters are going back to like their everyday lives. I would say here, if you like Harry Potter has a great example of this. When you look at the like final pages of the last book, when Voldemort has been defeated, the characters are older, and we're looking a bit into the future, and every one of the main characters are like sending their children off to Hogwarts, and like life has kind of settled down. So that's what happens at the end. And this is something you can read more about, but it's like giving you some kind of way to think of what's going to happen in the story. And you can also see here that even though it looks like this, you can also decide to change. Maybe here in the falling action, when it starts going down towards the end, something else can happen. There can be another conflict that pops up, another twist of fate. But that's up to you as a writer and what you can fit into your story. And now you're writing shorter stories, so maybe you don't have time to do too many deviations from what you're trying to do here. But that's the main gist of it. And now you guys are wondering, what the hell are we supposed to do? So that brings us to what you're doing in class. And in next class for next week, on Monday, we will listen a little bit, we will read a little bit from Sherlock, and then you will continue watching the episode that we started watching this week. And after that, you will start a writing assignment where you're writing your own short story. But all the instructions for that are coming during that class. You don't need to prepare anything for now, except thinking of, what might I want to write about? So that's all for today, and I will see you guys soon. Good luck with the writing.